Walk down any British high street in 1973 and you'd struggle to spot what we call obesity today. Photographs from that era reveal a startling truth. The average Briton was dramatically slimmer than their modern counterpart. This wasn't about gym memberships or diet trends. Something fundamentally different shaped how people ate, moved, and lived. The answer lies buried in rationing's long shadow, industrial canteens, and a culture that hadn't yet discovered convenience food. The Second World War ended in 1945, but rationing didn't fully disappear until 1954, nearly a decade later. An entire generation of Britons grew up understanding scarcity as normal. Butter, sugar, meat, and cheese remained precious commodities, measured in ounces, not pounds. Mothers learned to stretch every ingredient, creating meals from root vegetables and limited protein. This wasn't poverty cuisine, it was national character forged through necessity. By the 1970s, those wartime children had become parents themselves. They carried forward attitudes about waste, portion sizes, and the value of food that shaped household kitchens across the nation. Throwing away leftovers felt almost criminal. Second helpings were questioned, not automatic. The concept of eating until you were stuffed contradicted everything they'd internalized about moderation and gratitude. Government nutrition campaigns from the rationing era emphasized balanced meals without excess. The Ministry of Food had taught housewives to think scientifically about nutrition, creating a culture where knowing your daily requirements wasn't unusual. Women's magazines featured meal plans calculated to provide exactly what families needed, nothing more, nothing less. This mathematical approach to eating persisted long after rationing books turned to dust in attic drawers. Did rationing change diets? Car ownership in 1970 stood at roughly 52% of British households, meaning nearly half the population relied entirely on their feet, bicycles, or public transport. Children walked to school in groups, unsupervised by today's standards, often covering a mile or more twice daily. Adults walked to shops, to work, to visit friends. This wasn't exercise, it was simply how you got around. The British High Street functioned as the community hub, with specialised shops requiring multiple stops. You'd visit the butcher, then the greengrocer, then the baker, carrying increasingly heavy bags between each location. Housewives might walk several miles daily just accomplishing routine shopping, burning calories without thinking about fitness. Saturday markets meant even more walking, browsing stalls packed with seasonal produce and haggling over prices. Public transport meant more walking too. Getting to the bus stop, transferring between routes, walking from the station to your final destination, it all added up. People thought nothing of walking 20 minutes to save a few pence on fares. Owning a car didn't eliminate walking either. Parking near shops was limited, so you'd still park some distance away and hoof it. The accumulated movement throughout ordinary days created a baseline activity level that modern sedentary lifestyles can't match. Convenience foods existed in 1970, but they represented maybe 5% of household food spending compared to over 50% today. Frozen fish fingers and tinned soup were treats or emergency options, not daily staples. Mothers cooked from raw ingredients because that's what made economic sense. A whole chicken cost less than processed chicken nuggets would have, if they'd existed widely. Cooking skills passed between generations like family heirlooms. Teenage girls learned pastry, roasting, and sauce making in mandatory domestic science classes at school. Boys learned less, admittedly, but everyone understood that real food came from pots and pans, not packaging. Making a meal meant peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, and monitoring things on the stovetop for an hour or more. This labor-intensive process naturally limited portion sizes because making more food meant more work. Ready meals, microwaves, and takeaway culture barely existed. Chinese and Indian restaurants were novelties in larger cities, visited for special occasions. Fast food chains hadn't yet colonized every town center. Eating out meant sitting down in a proper restaurant with table service and prices that made it genuinely occasional. The default setting for dining was your own kitchen table, with food made that day from recognizable ingredients. preservatives, flavor enhancers, and engineered hyperpalatability hadn't yet hijacked British taste buds. The 1970s saw sugar at prices that made it something to use sparingly, not the cheap, ubiquitous ingredient it would later become. A bag of sugar represented a considered purchase in the weekly shopping budget. Baking a cake for Sunday tea meant using your sugar ration wisely. Sweets remained treats, given on Saturdays or as rewards, not constant snacking options. Soft drinks existed but occupied far less shelf space and household spending. Children drank water, milk, or weak squash diluted to make bottles last. Cola was a birthday party luxury, not a daily beverage. The concept of drinking hundreds of calories without noticing simply didn't exist in most homes. Tea and coffee came without sugar for many adults, partly from preference formed during rationing when sweetness wasn't guaranteed. Processed foods contained less sugar because manufacturers hadn't yet learned to exploit the ingredients' addictive properties. Breakfast cereals were porridge, cornflakes, or shredded wheat, not the frosted, chocolate-coated confections that would dominate later decades. Yogurt was plain and tangy, requiring you to add your own jam if you wanted sweetness. The food industry hadn't yet engineered products to trigger overconsumption through carefully calibrated sugar, salt, fat ratios that override natural satiety signals. Restaurant plates in the 1970s would look comically small to modern diners. A standard dinner plate measured 9 inches across, compared to 12 inches or larger today. This wasn't deprivation, it reflected normal appetite expectations. Serving someone a 16-ounce steak would have seemed wasteful and frankly bizarre. Meat appeared as part of the meal, not the main event, with vegetables and potatoes filling most plate space. Home cooking followed similar proportions. Recipe books from the era specified serving sizes that modern cooks would consider starters. A chicken was expected to feed a family of 4 across 2 meals, roasted one night, then the leftovers in a pie or soup the next. Stretching ingredients reflected both economy and cultural attitudes about greed versus moderation. Taking seconds happened, but casually grazing through multiple servings wasn't normalized. Restaurant culture reinforced these expectations. 3-course meals existed, certainly, but courses themselves were modest. Starter portions gave you a taste, not a plateful. Main courses fit on normal plates without architectural stacking or overhanging edges. Dessert was a treat-sized portion, not a challenge to finish. The American supersizing culture that would later sweep across the Atlantic hadn't yet arrived. Normal meant enough to satisfy hunger, not enough to create discomfort. The concept of constant eating throughout the day was virtually unknown in 1970s Britain. You ate breakfast, dinner, the midday meal for many, and tea, evening meal, with perhaps biscuits with afternoon tea. Between meal eating raised eyebrows and invoked comments about spoiling your appetite. Kitchen cupboards didn't contain the arrays of chips, crackers, and snack foods that would later become standard. Children received pocket money measured in pence, limiting sweet shop visits. A child might buy a 10-pence mix of penny sweets on Saturday, a carefully considered selection from jars behind the counter, weighed and placed in a paper bag. These treats lasted days, doled out by parents aware that spoiling appetites meant wasted meals. Chocolate bars were smaller and less common. Crisps came in simple flavors, eaten occasionally, not daily. Workplaces didn't feature vending machines on every floor. Office workers took morning tea breaks and afternoon tea breaks at set times, perhaps with a biscuit. Grazing at your desk wasn't just uncommon, it was considered unprofessional. The 24-hour eating culture, where food availability never ceases, simply didn't exist. Shops closed at 5:30, shutting down evening impulse buying. This limited accessibility naturally restricted consumption in ways modern 24-hour supermarkets and delivery apps have eliminated. Manufacturing and heavy industry still employed millions of Britons in jobs requiring physical exertion. Coal mining, steel production, shipbuilding, textile work, these sectors demanded bodies in motion for 8 or more hours daily. Even office jobs involved more movement. No email meant walking documents between departments, standing at filing cabinets, using manual typewriters. Automation hadn't yet eliminated the physical dimension from most employment. Household chores required serious effort. Washing machines existed but were basic, requiring manual loading, monitoring, and ringing. Vacuum cleaners were heavy, inefficient beasts that demanded pushing and pulling across carpets, nothing like today's lightweight cordless models. Cleaning windows, beating rugs, hanging laundry outside, scrubbing floors on hands and knees, maintaining a home meant genuine physical work, predominantly performed by women. Even leisure activities involved more movement. Gardening was common, producing vegetables and flowers without power tools. DIY home improvements meant hammering and painting by hand. Children played outside running around neighborhoods in games that would look unsupervised and dangerous. Television existed but offered only 3 channels with limited broadcasting hours, forcing people toward more active pastimes. The sedentary entertainment options that dominate modern leisure time simply weren't available. The ultra-processed foods that now dominate supermarket aisles barely existed in recognizable form during the 1970s. What processing did occur remained visible and understandable. Flour milled from wheat, butter churned from cream, cheese aged from milk. Ingredient lists, where they existed, contained familiar items. The chemical additives, emulsifiers, and engineered ingredients that would later transform food were absent or minimal. Bread came from bakeries or was made at home using flour, water, yeast, and salt. The pillowy, preservative-laden loaf designed for week-long shelf life hadn't yet replaced proper bread. Meat was recognizable as having come from an animal chops, joints, mince, not reformed and shaped into nuggets or processed slices. Fish meant whole fish or clear fillets, not breadcrumb-coated mystery products. You could identify what you were eating by looking at it. Food scientists hadn't yet perfected the hyperpalatable combinations that override natural fullness signals. Products weren't engineered to create what the industry calls craveable qualities, that perfect balance of salt and sugar and fat that keeps you eating past satiation. Meals had natural stopping points because the food itself didn't trigger compulsive overconsumption. This wasn't willpower, it was the absence of deliberately addictive food engineering that would characterize later decades. Weight gain attracted comment in ways that would be inappropriate, or even discriminatory today. Doctors bluntly told patients to lose weight. Employers could and did make remarks about employees' appearance. Family members felt free to observe that you put on a few pounds with an expectation you'd address it. This wasn't kindness, certainly, but it created social pressure toward maintaining weight within certain ranges. Fashion reinforced these expectations. Clothing came in limited size ranges, with nothing comparable to modern plus-size options. If you gained weight, you often couldn't find clothes that fit rather than stores stocking larger sizes. Tailors could let out seams only so far. This created a practical feedback where gaining weight meant wardrobe difficulties, providing concrete motivation to maintain relatively stable weight. Television and media featured almost exclusively slim presenters and actors. Representation of diverse body types barely existed. Advertising showed idealized families with parents and children all matching a narrow physical template. While damaging in many ways, this cultural uniformity created clear expectations about normal body size. The body positivity movement and size acceptance advocacy that would later challenge these standards didn't yet exist, leaving weight as an unquestioned personal responsibility. Food represented a much larger percentage of household spending in the 1970s, typically 25 to 30% compared to 10 to 15% today. With tighter budgets, families couldn't afford waste or excess. You bought what you needed, planned meals carefully, and ate everything purchased. Throwing away food meant literally throwing away money that hurt household finances immediately. Eating out was genuinely expensive relative to income, making it a monthly or even less frequent occurrence for most families. A restaurant meal might cost what someone earned in half a day's work, making every such occasion memorable. Fast food chains hadn't yet offered cheap calories on every corner. The economics simply pushed people toward home cooking and appropriate portions because alternatives were unaffordable. Unemployment, economic uncertainty marked the decade, with power cuts, and the 3-day week in 1974. These conditions created anxiety about resources that influenced consumption patterns. People who'd lived through genuine scarcity, either during rationing or through economic hardship, didn't casually overindulge when times improved. The boom and bust psychology shaped conservative eating habits, with excess viewed as tempting fate in an uncertain world. The slimness of 1970s Britons wasn't about superior willpower or moral virtue. It reflected a completely different food environment and way of life. Walking everywhere, cooking from scratch, limited processed foods, smaller portions, minimal snacking, and manual labor all combined to create calorie balance without conscious effort. Economic constraints, social pressures, and lingering rationing psychology reinforced these patterns. The modern obesity epidemic doesn't represent personal failure. It shows how dramatically our food environment, daily routines, have transformed in just 50 years, overwhelming the biological mechanisms that once naturally regulated weight.